everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. So as you saw from the thumbnail and the title of this video, this is going to be a massive book haul. These are all books that I have been buying, I think, since the end of March up until now, and it's like mid-June. I have over 40 books to talk about today. So yeah, definitely go get a snack and come back and settle in, because this is probably going to be a long video. Yeah, these are all books that I've bought from either Amazon. I've also placed some orders with independent bookstores, but I think I'm still waiting on all of those books to come in. So there will be another book haul probably at some point next month. And I also have some books from eBay that I got, as well as bookshop.org. If you don't know what bookshop.org is, it is a website where you can buy any book you want, basically, but part of the sales, part of the profit goes towards independent and small bookstores. Okay, so without further ado, let's just get into this book haul. The first book that I have is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. So I've heard a lot of things very recently about this book. All I know about this is that it is centered around a book club, of course, and the main character meets this man who she comes to believe might be a vampire, and that's really it. So I'm really excited to get to this. I do have the audiobook for this one on hold from my library through Libby, so hopefully I'll get to read this one soon. The next one I have is Lovely War by Julie Berry. So I don't read a lot of historical fiction, but this one I have heard so many people just raving and raving about, and the plot does sound like something I might love, so I just couldn't pass it up myself. Plus, the hardcover for this one was only like $10 on Amazon, so I just went ahead and bought it. But from what I understand, this is a historical fiction novel that centers around both World War I and World War II, and the POV is from Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love, and I think maybe there's other POVs of other gods or goddesses, I'm not really sure. Next are two books that are kind of a part of the same nonfiction historical series. So the first one is An African American and Latinx History of the United States by Paul Ortiz. This is what it looks like. And the other one I got is An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. So I assume that these authors are related in some way. Maybe they're husband and wife, maybe they're siblings, I'm not really sure. So I decided to get these two books because they both have a lot of great reviews on Goodreads and really high ratings overall. And I wanted to educate myself in terms of history that I was never taught in school. Let's face it, the history that we learn in school is very much white-centered, and so I wanted to get the real story behind both the African American, Latinx, and the indigenous populations in our country, basically. So I am very excited to read these. They're gonna take me quite a long time to get through because they're pretty dense, and nonfiction also takes me quite a long time to read, but I am very excited to tab and annotate both of these. Next up, I have Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I actually just talked about this book in my June mid-month wrap-up, so I will link that up in the cards above. I loved this, gave it 5 stars. Elizabeth Acevedo is one of my absolute favorite YA fiction authors. This is written in verse, and it is essentially about these two girls. One of them lives in New York City, one of them lives in the Dominican Republic, but they actually have a lot more in common than you might think. So yes, highly recommend this one. Next up, I have Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. This is by Rennie Edo Lodge. Let me actually read the blurb on the back because I ordered this so long ago. This was one of the back-ordered books that I ordered. It says, exploring everything from eradicated Black history to the political purpose of white dominance, from whitewashed feminism to the inextricable link between class and race, Edo Lodge offers a timely and essential new framework for how to see, acknowledge, and counter racism. Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race is an essential handbook for anyone looking to understand how structural racism works. So this was another book that has very high ratings on Goodreads, so I knew that I needed to have this in my personal library as well, and I'm also going to tab and annotate this book quite a bit. Next up, I have Slay. This is by Brittany Morris, and ooh, this is a beautiful cover. Like, there's some shiny elements going on. But this one has to do with this Black gamer. She actually creates this game. It's called Slay, and it says Black gamers duel worldwide as Nubian personas in the secret multiplayer online role-playing card game Slay. And she is the developer of this game, but nobody knows that, and I'm sure the plot goes on from there. I've heard really good things about this. Also, I do want to read more books about games and gamers in general. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to checking this out at some point. Next up, I have The Black Flamingo. This is by David Atta, and it is a Stonewall Book Award winner. This is about this mixed-race gay teen named Michael, and he discovers drag culture. That is essentially what this book is about, I think. Yes, this is written in verse. I adore books written in verse, so I have a feeling that I'm going to love this. Next up, I have With the Fire on High, which is by Elizabeth Acevedo. Now that I'm thinking about something I forgot about Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo is her naked hardbacks are absolutely stunning. I mean, just look at that. And the reason why I thought about that is because With the Fire on High also has a gorgeous naked hardback. I'll just show it to you guys. It's got like food and stuff. It's just a beautiful, beautiful naked hardback. So this is actually a book that I think Acevedo wrote in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. This one is not written in verse. And I've already read this one and I really enjoyed it as well. I think I gave it 4 stars, but I definitely want to reread it at some point. This one's about Imani. She's actually kind of a single mother. The father's in the picture, but he's not nearly as involved as Imani in raising their daughter. And she also loves to cook, so she takes this cooking class at her high school, and the plot goes on from there. Next up, I have How to Walk Away by Katherine Center. So I read Things You Save in a Fire by the same author some months back, and I absolutely adored it, and I didn't think I was going to, so I had to go ahead and pick up one of her backlist titles. I'm not really sure what this is about, but it talks about the main character Margaret and how she's about to go into like her picture perfect life when everything that she's worked for is taken away in a brief, tumultuous moment. So I am really looking forward to reading this because, like I said, I really loved her other book. This is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This is a book that everyone and literally their mother has read. I think this is also like a women's fiction mystery thriller book. I'm not really sure. The only thing I know is that there's this woman, she's known as the Marsh Girl. She is like a social pariah. Nobody talks to her. She doesn't really interact with the town or anything like that. And then somebody gets murdered and I think she ends up being accused of committing that murder. So that's really all I know, but it is part of Reese's book club, which is really fun. All right, next I have some historical romances because of course I can't stop buying them because they're such small books and they don't take up much shelf room. So the first one I have is Then Came You by Lisa Kleypas. This is a book that I ordered like a while ago when I ordered a bunch of other Lisa Kleypas books in my last book haul. I'll also link that video up in the cards above. But this is book 1 in her like Gamblers series. There's only 2 books and this was published way back in 1993. So I'm very interested to see if I'm going to love it because older historical romances tend to have consent issues and other issues in terms of how women are treated. Then I have The Beast of Bestwick by Amelie Howard. This is book 1 in a new series by her. And one of my lovely subscribers actually sent this to me, so thank you so much. And I'm actually gonna send her a couple of books in return, so that's really exciting. And this, as you can probably tell, is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. We all know that I'm absolute trash for Beauty and the Beast retellings, and the plot just sounded really amazing. So I'm really looking forward to reading this as soon as possible, and as soon as the sequel for this goes up on NetGalley, I'm definitely going to request it. Next up I have The Rakess by Scarlet Peckham. I talked about this book a lot in one of my previous wrap-ups. I want to say maybe my end of May wrap-up, but I went into this thinking that I wasn't going to like it at all and I ended up giving it 5 stars. So yeah, this is essentially about this woman Serafina, and she's definitely a very radical thinking woman, and she meets this wonderful guy Adam who is actually a widower, and he's got 2 young children, and the plot goes on from there. So I decided it was finally time to buy a couple of Beverly Jenkins books. She is a very popular Black historical romance author, and pretty much all of her characters I think in her romances are Black, which is really great. We definitely need that diversity in the historical romance genre. So the first book that I got is Destiny's Surrender. I believe this is book 1 in her, I want to say it's just called the Destiny Trilogy, and I think it centers around maybe 3 sisters. I'm not really sure. But this one I believe centers around a prostitute, and there is a surprise pregnancy involved in the plot. So I know some people hate that trope. I don't personally hate it. I don't love it either. But I'm just very excited to read from Beverly Jenkins. I've heard nothing but phenomenal things. The other book that I have from her is just called Midnight. This is a standalone, I believe, and it has to do with this woman who by day she's like a normal person, and by night she's known as Lady Midnight, and she is a notorious spy. And I think this takes place during the American Revolution, which is really, really fun. I haven't read any historical romances that take place any earlier than like 1800s. So yeah, that sounds like a really fun time. Next up, I have The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I actually just finished reading this either yesterday or the day before, and I really enjoyed it. I can't believe I'd never read it before. We didn't have to read it in high school, at least not the class that I was in. I mean, this is a classic in every sense of the word, although it was only published in 1982. I thought that it was written like years before that, because it just seems like it's so prevalent in our culture that it just seemed like it was an older book. But for those of you guys that don't know, this is about Celie and Nettie. They are 2 sisters. They ended up getting separated pretty early in life. And this book is basically kind of letters between the 2 of them, as well as letters from Celie to God. And it's just such an important book. I completely recommend that everybody reads this. Next up, I have So You Want to Talk About Race, which is by Ijoma Oluo. As you can see, I already read it because I put a lot of tabs in it. I just finished this the other day as well. And I think the title tells you everything that you need to know, but this is literally the perfect place to start, the perfect book to start with if you are looking to educate yourself about race, racial issues, how to deal with racial issues, and how to be a better ally and a better activist for social justice and for racial justice and things like that. This author, I thought, did a phenomenal job in talking about all of these issues in only about 250 pages. And there's also like autobiographical elements because she brings her own experiences into this book, and it's just phenomenal. Gave it 5 stars. I highly recommend that everybody read this, but especially white people, this is definitely a book that you need to read. Next up, I have Ghosts of the Shadow Market. This is by Cassandra Clare and a ton of other authors. This is a bind up of like 10 novellas, I think, and I read the first 8 novellas in this bind up because they were all published individually as ebooks, and then there are 2 novellas in this that were only published in the bind up, so that's why I went ahead and bought this bind up. And yeah, this is just novellas. It takes place in the Shadowhunter Chronicles universe, and there's novellas about the characters that are in Chain of Gold, as well as characters from all of the other series in this universe. And the last book in this stack is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So George M. Johnson is a non-binary Black activist, and this is their memoir essentially. It is more catered towards the YA audience, but I think anyone of any age could benefit from reading this. I haven't read this yet, but Jesse from Bow Ties and Books, I just found their channel like a couple of weeks ago, and I have been binging all of their videos. I just love their content. I love them as a person. Jesse has just raved and raved about this book so much. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be their favorite book of 2020. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking about this book, but I cannot wait to read it. I'm also going to link Jesse's YouTube channel up in the cards above because I just highly recommend that you check out their channel. All right, next up we have American Royals by Katherine Mcgee. I've also already read this and talked about it in a past wrap-up. I think I talked about it in the same wrap-up that I talked about the Ray Kess, so definitely check out that video. But this is a YA series that is centered around the idea of what if the United States was a monarchy instead of a democracy, and it's basically a teen soap opera in book form. I absolutely loved it. Gave it 5 stars. If you love Gossip Girl, if you love any teen drama that has to do with royals, I think that you will really enjoy this book. And the second book in this series is coming out, I think, in September, which is really exciting. Next up, we have The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and look at all these awards that this book has won. This is, I believe, Elizabeth Acevedo's first book that she published, at least with a major publisher, and this is written in verse. I read this back in 2018. It was one of my absolute favorite books of that year. Can't recommend it enough. So yeah, I'm gonna stop talking about it. Next up, I have The Girl with the Louding Voice. This is by Abi DeRay. I don't know much about this book, but first of all, can we talk about the cover? I just love, we stand vibrant colors in this house, okay? But this one is about this 14-year-old girl named Aduni, I think, and she lives in Nigeria. She desperately wants an education, but she ends up getting sold to a man as his third wife, and the plot goes on from there. Next up, I have Borne a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is stories from a South African childhood. So this is a memoir from him, but I think it is just focusing on his childhood. I don't think it's focusing as much on his comedy career. For those of you guys that don't know who Trevor Noah is, he is a comedian. He does stand-up. There are some stand-up specials of his on Netflix, but he's also the host of The Daily Show, which is a Comedy Central show, where he talks about politics and everything under the sun that you can think of really having to do with this country. But he's also a really funny person, and I've heard nothing but phenomenal things about this memoir. And I did go ahead and get the audiobook off of Audible as well, because it is only, unfortunately, it's only available through Audible. But whenever I read memoirs, I always want to hear the person themselves narrate it. So yeah, I'm really pumped to read this at some point. Next, I bought the 2 books in the Archive duology by V.E. Schwab. In this case, she's known as Victoria Schwab because this is YA. We have the Archived and we have the Unbound. And I think this was meant to be a longer series, but I think she just stopped writing after the first 2 books. I don't know too much about this series, except that I believe it has to do with like a library with ghosts. Like, instead of it being a book library, it's a ghost library, and that sounds really interesting. I've heard a lot of people rave about this duology, and I do really enjoy Victoria Schwab's writing, so I have a feeling that I'm really gonna enjoy those books as well. Next up, I have Felix Ever After. This is by Kaysen Callender. So this book centers around Felix, who is transgender, queer, and Black. And essentially, I think somebody starts sending him transphobic messages and even outs his dead name. And so he is essentially out for revenge. The plot of this sounded really good. So many people have been reading this lately, but it just sounds like a really phenomenal book. Also, it looks like that Kaysen is non-binary, so I'm really looking forward to reading from that perspective as well. Next up, we have Like a Love Story. This also won the Stonewall Book Award, and this is by Abdi Nizamian. I think that's how his name is pronounced, but I could be wrong. But this is a YA novel that takes place in 1989 in New York City, and it has to do with the AIDS epidemic. That's really all I know about this book. But once again, this is a book that so many people have been raving about. I think this is also a 2020 release, which is always exciting. Next up, I have The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. I actually read this a couple of weeks ago and featured it in my June mid-month wrap-up, so definitely check out that video if you want to hear my thoughts about this. But I gave it 5 stars. It's a phenomenal book about this girl, Alessandra. It takes place in this very stereotypical YA fantasy kingdom world, I guess you could say. And she is plotting to seduce and marry the Shadow King so that she can kill him and have the kingdom for herself. And it's just a really fun time. I highly recommend it. Next up, I have Lifting as We Climb, Black Women's Battle for the Ballot Box. This is by Yvette Dion. I think that's how her name is pronounced. This is actually a very short book, but when I saw this on Goodreads, I could not resist buying a copy for myself. I feel like this is a topic we don't hear about. You know, Black women and women of colors fight to vote as well as white women. I feel like anytime you see pictures of the suffrage movement or any kind of history, it's always centered around white women. I'm very excited about this book. Next up, I have In the Dream House, which is by Carmen Maria Machado. This is another book that Jessie from Bow Ties and Books has raved and raved and raved about. I don't know too much about this plot, except that it does feature an LGBTQ plus couple. I think it's a relationship between 2 women and how that relationship turns abusive, which I think is a very interesting topic, because whenever you hear about domestic violence or any type of abusive relationship, it's usually between a straight couple and it's usually the man abusing the woman. But I'm very interested to hear this perspective, and yeah, I've heard phenomenal things about this book as well. Next up, we have She Came to Slay, The Life and Times of Harriet Tubman. This is by Erica Armstrong Dunbar, and what really attracted me to this book is not only does it tell, you know, the true story of Harriet Tubman, but it does have like a multimedia kind of aspect to it. We've got got pictures. So we've got different maps, like this one is labeled Harriet's Moves, this one is labeled Traveling the Underground. There's various pictures of Harriet herself, as well as, I don't know, like propaganda and things like that of the time that she lived in. Next up, I have 3 books from Book of the Month. Now, I know Book of the Month has come under fire recently. I'm not going to go into all the drama, but they essentially tried to post something in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, but it was kind of half-assed, I think. And so I think a Black Bookstagrammer commented on that post, you know, basically calling them out for that, and apparently they deleted the comment. They were trying to silence that booktuber, and so things just kind of snowballed from there. So a lot of people have been unsubscribing from Book of the Month recently. I did unsubscribe from them after placing this final order, but I did end up resubscribing to them. Then Read with Cindy, I'm actually going to link the video either up in the cards or down in the description box below, but she posted, I think, her mid-year book freakout tag, and she did take a minute to talk about Book of the Month because she has partnered with them for like months or years at this point. And she made some really good points about the very real changes that Book of the Month is going to make within their company. They are planning on hiring more people of color, and they are also planning on featuring more books by authors of color, which is really great. So Cindy basically just said, I'm just gonna kind of wait and see if they make those changes, and if they don't, then I will definitely sever my contract with them. And so that's kind of why I ended up resubscribing, because I do like their service, and if they do make those changes, then I will stay subscribed, and if they don't make those changes, then I will definitely unsubscribe. But anyways, so I have The Vanishing Half, which is by Britt Bennett. This is one of the June 2020 picks, and the plot of this sounded amazing. I also adore this cover because, yes, give me all of the rainbow vibes. We stan rainbows in this house. But I think this is essentially about 2 sisters, and I think they are identical twins, but they end up getting separated, I think, at the age of like 16, because I think they both end up marrying very different people. So it kind of reminds me of The Color Purple in that aspect, but I've heard nothing but phenomenal things. I'm gonna say that about so many books in this haul. I just realized that. So sorry for being redundant, but yes, I'm very excited about getting to this. Then the other 2 books I got, the first one is What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker. This is a memoir and essays by Damon Young. And then the other memoir I got is Thick and Other Essays by Tressie McMillan Kodum. That's what this one looks like. Again, these are both memoirs that have very high ratings on Goodreads, and I do think it's very important to read memoirs from not only authors of color, but just authors that are from very different perspectives than your own. Oh my god, guys, we're almost there. I have this one last stack of books. So the first one is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I'm so excited to finally have this book in my personal library. I read this back in 2018, absolutely adored it. It was one of my top 10 books of that year, and this is a book that is told in verse. Just to give you a very basic synopsis, this centers around Will and his older brother Sean, who has just been shot and killed by a rival gang. So Will immediately grabs a gun, gets in the elevator of his apartment complex, and plans to retaliate for that. But this is a very interesting concept because the elevator ends up stopping at every floor, and every time the elevator stops, the ghost from someone in Will's life that has been killed because of gun violence steps in the elevator and talks to Will, and this is just such an amazing and powerful book. It still resonates with me to this day, even though I read it over 2 years ago. Oh, just so good. If you haven't read this yet, what are you doing? Next up, we have Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. So Tiffany D. Jackson is an author that I have been meaning to read from for quite some time. I already have her book Allegedly on my shelf. It's been on my shelf for like a year. So this one essentially centers around this young Black girl who goes missing and her best friend who is trying to figure out how she disappeared and where she is. The little blurb on the back says, "This is the story of how my best friend disappeared, how nobody noticed she was gone except me, and how nobody cared until they found her 1 year later." So I'm really looking forward to reading this. Then I have Dreamland Burning. This is by Jennifer Latham. What really drew me to this book is that it is a historical fiction book that centers around Black characters, which, let's be real, you don't see very often. The historical fiction genre is very much a white-centered genre, which is weird. And so this book takes place in both the present and the past, and specifically the past is 1921 in Tulsa, and it centers around the Tulsa massacre that I feel like a lot of us are only just now learning about. Vox, which is a really great YouTube channel, they posted a video about the massacre. I want to say about a year ago. I'll link it either up in the cards or down in the description below. I just thought it was such a phenomenal video. It really educated me about this event. I'm really looking forward to reading this because, like I said, I want more historical fiction that is centered around people of color in general, and I definitely want to read more about this event. Next, we've got a few books by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did get a paperback copy of Daisy Jones and the Six. I love this cover so much. But I'm disappointed because I saw that Emma Books got this exact copy and hers had like these gorgeous like ombre sprayed edges. And so I ordered this exact same copy from Book Depository, hoping that I would get the sprayed edges, but unfortunately there are no sprayed edges. So I think I'm gonna end up unhauling this, but I think what I'm gonna do is include this in a giveaway for you guys. I'm thinking of either doing a giveaway when I reach 500 subscribers or when I reach 1,000 subscribers. I'm not really sure yet, but this book will definitely be included in that because I want as many people as possible to read this book. This is a phenomenal book that everybody talks about. It was one of my favorite books of 2019. Highly, highly recommend it. The other book that I got by Taylor Jenkins Reid is After I Do. I've also already read this, gave it 4 stars, really enjoyed it, but I do want to reread it at some point. And this is essentially about a married couple named Lauren and Ryan. They end up separating for a year because their marriage is not going well, and so they decide to separate, and if after a year they still don't want to be together, they will divorce. And yeah, it's a really great story. And then finally I have One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is an interesting story. It centers around this character Emma. She gets married to her high school sweetheart Jesse, but he ends up essentially going missing, and he's been missing for like years and years at this point, I think. And so she ends up falling in love with this other guy, Sam, but then Jesse ends up coming back, and so this is essentially a love triangle. And I've heard really great things about this book, and I trust Taylor Jenkins Reid at this point, so I think I'm going to really enjoy it. Oh my god, guys, we have 3 books left. Okay, so the first one is To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is just a really fun YA book. I think it centers around a siren and this guy who is like a siren slash mermaid hunter. And it sounds like it's definitely much more of like a darker YA fantastical story, I guess you could say. I don't think it's as like lighthearted and happy as Disney's The Little Mermaid, but yeah, it just sounds like a really fun, like twisted fairy tale kind of thing, so I'm really excited to get to this at some point. I have The Underground Railroad. This is by Colson Whitehead. This is a fiction book actually about the Underground Railroad. We're centering around Cora, who is a young slave on a cotton plantation in Georgia, and so it essentially chronicles her journey on the Underground Railroad. Once again, I've heard amazing things about this book, so I'm very excited to read it. And then the very last book of this book haul, we made it, guys, we made it, is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This is what it looks like. It says, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. I think this book just centers around the concept of redlining, and if you don't know what that is, definitely go look it up on Google. It is a very important part of our history, and it is also a very important part of the history of segregation in this country in general. And this is a book that so many people recommend as a great historical resource, so that's why I just went ahead and bought it. And once again, this is going to be another book that I cannot wait to tab and annotate. Oh my god, guys, we made it! That is it! That is the end of this book haul, and like I said, definitely be on the lookout for another book haul next month once my back-ordered books come in. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I would love it if you guys would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. And yeah, I would also love it if you would like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!